Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Cohesion Podcast. I'm Carolyn Clark. I'm so happy to be with you all today. I'm Simpplr's Vice President of Corporate Communications and Employee Experience Strategy, and I could not be happier to be joined by Lisa Colella today. She is the Managing Director of Strategic Communications and Leadership Advisory at CRA Admired Leadership. Lisa, I'm so glad you're on the show today.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me, Carolyn. I know this conversation is long overdue, so I'm glad we're making it happen.
Yeah, and I know you have that vacation glow coming off of vacation, which is always a good way to be coming into a podcast. So let's keep it going with some fun. I want to start a little bit of icebreaker questions. This is one of my favorite things to do, just to get to know you a little bit. You can say skip if you don't know the answer to any of them, but I'm sure you're gonna do great. So let's start first with something easy. What's the last book that you read, not for work, but for fun and pleasure?
Oh, I read a lot of workbooks.
Yeah, I figured. I bet you do.
And then when I'm not reading my workbooks, my learning books, I'm reading my children books. So actually, it's a really great book called Young Changemakers that I'm reading with my daughter that really looks at all of the young women and how they have taken a challenge or a particular passion and turned it into something that really makes a difference in the world. So we've been loving reading that one together.
Oh, I love that. That sounds like a good one. I have to read it to my daughter as well. I'll put it down. Okay, I like this one because I think it's an interesting take. What is an insult that you've received that you're proud of?
An insult that I'm proud of?
Yes.
Oh, not unusual, assertive, bossy, alpha female. I get that a lot, and it's become, for whatever reason, our society to often be misconstrued as a negative, but I embrace it and think it's all, as long as it's done respectfully and with love, it's what we as women need to do more of.
Yeah, I love that too. I often say, like, yeah, call me bossy. Go ahead. I'm not going to, they do. Everyone does that as an insult, I think, but you're right. It is kind of a bit of a compliment at times. Okay, more for you. If you could know this one's so good. If you could know the answer to one mystery, what would it be?
I just like it, just how all of creation has come to be. I mean, just the world in general is a mystery. And my kids constantly are teaching me new things about the universe and the solar system. It is just mind boggling to me how what we've come to know as nature, how it all began. And I think it'll always be a mystery, but it is one that I enjoy contemplating from time to time.
I like that. Okay, some easy ones for you. Are you a tea drinker or a coffee drinker?
Coffee in the morning, tea at night.
Awesome. What kind of tea? What's your favorite?
I love a good mint chamomile tea, wind down before bed.
That's good. And when in the morning, do you want to have alone time first, or do you want to get right into conversation? What's your mornings like?
Oh, alone time first. I need some space. And usually I have a nice little morning routine where I get a workout in. I have a nice cup of coffee in a quiet setting before I go wake the kids up and get started with my work day. But I do like easing into the day and really making sure that I'm grounded, that I'm focused, that I have my priorities clear before I jump into the world. I
imagine this is a practice that you often talk with leaders about as they're preparing for big conversations or presentations or any kind of important moment. I imagine you're telling them to also do some grounding when they wake their day or before they do a presentation or have a conversation. Okay, last of our icebreaker questions. Do you prefer making a quick decision, or do you want to sleep on things and then decide?
I usually have an initial instinct, and I usually like to sleep on it and just make sure that I've thought things through. I know that I have a tendency to sometimes want to move fast. It's just my personality. And so over time, it's taken some training, but now I really make sure I dedicate a little bit of time, an appropriate amount of time to sleep on it and make sure that all considerations have had their place before I actually make it and pull the trigger.
Yeah, that's interesting. And this is a little, one of the things that I've thought about, and I'd be curious, you've obviously been in the employee space, the employee comm space, employee brand space. And often those roles, we have to make pretty fast decisions. And so I think like you, most of us do have that gut instinct. I'm curious what you think. I feel like it takes more energy to actually pause, trust your gut, but give it a minute. What's your take on that generally?
For me personally, it does. I think everyone's made slightly differently and have had different experiences. But yeah, I think it does require a certain amount of energy to be thoughtful and to be patient and really make sure that we call it living the decision before you make it, to really be able to use as much time as you do have to actually live a decision before you formally announce it and communicated it. And sometimes you have that luxury, and other times it's just a matter of playing it through in your mind for a few hours first. But I really try to be thoughtful about that. And I find that those who make the best decisions have similar practices.
Live in the decision is what, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's a good take. Well, you have a fascinating background. It was really interesting reading about you. You're based in Massachusetts. You've had a lot of cool careers. Obviously, you have landed at CRA, but I want to hear just a little bit. Will you tell me about your career journey? And that could be anything, where you decide you start your career. For me, I started as a kid. I knew immediately what I wanted to do from the beginning. But tell us a little bit about your career journey. What led you to where you are today, and kind of your story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always been a little bit of a Jill of many trades, if you will. Some call me a walking oxymoron. Growing up, I was always within a 10-minute span would be working on creative projects and crafting, and the next 10 minutes be diving into human psychology books. So I always kind of had this strong draw to both art and science, and kind of that interplay has always been core to who I am and how I experience the world. When I went to college, I found a university where I could double major in communications and arts and minor in business marketing, because I knew even then that really that interplay would come in and be helpful for my future career, whatever that was going to be. I taking that and combining it with my passion for really helping people and organizations be better, get better every day, has been kind of the catalyst behind all of my career decisions. In terms of what that's looked like, early on, I worked in some advertising agencies and creative departments and account teams, really to get kind of the full view of creative communications. When I worked on a political campaign for a little while back in 2007, before quickly realizing like my ethical compass was not there. And then I fell into the world of consulting, and I was there for several years before I went in-house, and spent 9 years at Philips in various leadership roles, some in employer branding, some in executive communications and programs, lived in various countries around the world, which was amazing life experience beyond work experience too. And then in 2018, I kind of grew my entrepreneurial wings and started a small boutique consultancy in the communication space. And then all of that really has kind of come together in my current role at CRA. So at CRA, we have 3 interrelated practices. So we have our leadership practice, our strategic communication practice, and our talent practice. So I really enjoyed working across all 3 of these areas in my career. And so that in and of itself was appealing about the firm. But what really drew me to CRA was we really take a research-backed approach to everything that we do. So we've studied over 12,000 of exceptional leaders, right? And continue to review empirical kind of scientific communication literature to identify really what actually works. So not just what sounds good or looks like a pretty slide, but really, what is effective for organizations and their challenges. So it's really helped me get even better for my clients and their teams, and keeps it fun along the way.
That's so interesting. I think it's interesting hearing the start of your career, because if one didn't know, I mean, all of these pieces, from the political campaign to even the art world, there is all of this depth that can be brought into what you all are trying to do as you're kind of training leaders to be leaders, to better communicate, to really make an impact. It's interesting to, that the mixture of that. And I wonder how that also, the data background, the art background, how does that change when you're interacting with a leader? Because I can imagine, as a comms person myself, I'm interacting with leaders who are very diverse in their backgrounds as well. They may have had similar backgrounds too, where they're a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and it builds to this one story. Do you talk a little bit about that? Because I think one of the challenges that many of us have is getting to the heart of a leader's story to bring out the goodness that we want them to bring. Is that something that you all think about when you're talking to leaders and you bring that into play?
Yeah, I mean, we think about it all the time. At the end of the day, leadership is about values and relationships and empathy and a lot of human qualities. But the kind of the magical part, though, is we can really, in an intentional way, kind of engineer them to achieve there are really three communicator goals. So what's their task? What do they want people to know, to believe, to do? Their identity roles, which is where we spend a lot of time, to your question around how do you want to be perceived? What values do you want to be known for? And their relationship goals. How do you want to use X, Y, and Z communication to further that relationship or to strengthen the relationships that you need to be successful? And so once we really get clear with them, and it does, sometimes it takes a little while for them to think back of, who is the person underneath that business card or that board presentation. But once they get clear on how they want to be perceived as a leader, what values they want to be known for, then it becomes a really kind of fun process to explore together, to really pick out, these are the symbols, right, that they can carry into their everyday, the choices they make, how they spend their time, just to make sure that they're communicating it, not just within formal communication moments, town halls, presentations, etc., but in informal communications, which we know actually has a disproportionate effect on culture more so than formal communications.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I can think of the moments in my career when, when I've thought about what good leadership is, and so much of it for me as an empath, as a communicator, comes back to that informal piece, because and I'd love to hear you expand on this just a little bit. That informal piece, I imagine, has a direct impact on the formality, as well. And I imagine there's a credibility build that happens. And I'd love to hear you just talk a little bit about that, the credibility of with an individual conversation or even a broader conversation that is informal, that when you come into a formal setting, do you see them play together, that informal leadership piece, the humanity of it, playing with that sort of more formal, polished piece? Is that
Yeah, I think they're both always in play. It's one of the kind of like 5 cornerstones. We call them 5 axioms of communication. As the first is, there's literally no way to not communicate. Everything communicates. And so there's always, what's actually being said, and then the nonverbals and the style and things that are not necessarily heard, but are very real in terms of being perceived. And so the goal is that we educate them and we equip leaders to know, kind of have a toolbox, if you will, right? Yeah. And they pull from the toolbox intentionally instead of accidentally. And so when we think about formal versus informal communication, there's nothing wrong with formal communication. It is absolutely needed to drive, for example, clarity and strategy and alignment. But more of the trust and warmth and connection comes through informal communication. So it's really kind of knowing what's going to help you achieve your goals in a certain context, and kind of which communication method or combination, will help achieve those goals.
Have you seen, and I'm sure you've worked with, as I know the firm has worked with so many leaders, you specifically, have you seen someone transform? I'm sure you've seen a lot of transformation, but I can imagine once you've had that conversation, about bringing the warmth, bringing the humanity to leadership. I can imagine if you've never heard that as a leader, or you've just kind of put it at the periphery and kept with a certain, I don't know the words for it, but a certain style. I bet there's an interesting transformation to be seen when you can see a leader kind of hit that warmth, hit that humanity in both formal and informal. Can you think of an example, like something like that, that's been like an aha moment for you with them?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, I work with a lot of leaders. Like you said, the firm works with a lot of leaders. Some of the most, actually a recent case that I can call upon as just an example. We were prepping an ELT group of a Fortune organization for their first presentation to the board as a new leadership team. The COO had been in that role for 20 plus years and had moved to the CEO role. So longstanding history within the organization. There was a lot of norms around his style, right? And he was one that had typically shied away from vulnerability and answering questions that were like alluded to any sort of personal factors. And the good news is about norms is you can actually disrupt them in really positive ways, right? Because if you to create a certain meaning, when you do have an establishment of norms, you can use we call it disrupting expectations to your advantage, right? And so we were able to work with him, get him a little bit more comfortable of what's it going to look like to signal to the board and your leadership team that it is now CEO version of you versus COO that they're expecting. And so we worked with them on a lot of different things, or just around kind of some of the narrative architecture, but more so style, being more of that inclusive leader, really being able to call out specifically contributions his team members were making, which hadn't historically been a strength. And some of those intentional symbolism and style changes, they literally applaud it, and they're like, we have never seen you like this before. And it really kind of marked that transition period, which was an exciting story.
When you're thinking about some of these, the dichotomy of leaders, right, and their different kind of styles, why are people hesitant, I guess is the real question, to kind of grasp into both the soft and the formal side? What's the barrier to entry there? Because it seems like that there is. It seems like it would be a natural thing to want to be authentic and human and soft while also being effective, all the things. But what's that barrier that you see that leaders have?
Yeah, I mean, some of it is generational. There's been different eras of leadership where certain behaviors or certain ways of leading were more reinforced than others. We're now in this era just happens to be one where we're really looking for a balanced style and to make intentional choices around, what the context is of the situation, what the leader's goals are for that situation, and thus how communications can help get them closer to, or unfortunately farther away from, their goals. One of the really fascinating areas of work that we have, we call our style code, which is actually our research-based framework for understanding leadership presence and expression, and helping leaders be very thoughtful about, if you want to achieve a certain goal, what sort of power or attractive expression do you need to do? Now, some leaders will say, well, this is this is the opposite of authentic leadership. And if I'm kind of choosing to lean forward to make a statement versus lean back, like, am I over engineering it? And really, we kind of use the analogy of a singer. Our goal isn't to make you into someone totally different than you're not, but everyone has a range. And sometimes you need to lean a little bit more attractive for a certain situation, or a little bit more powerful. And just like a singer's voice, like your singer's voice is yours, but you can kind of, work with it to go up a range, to go down a range, based on what the note calls for, or in our situation, in our case, what the situation calls for. And so we really try to help leaders not push them outside of totally their comfort zone, but to give them a broader range that they can draw upon based on what the circumstance requires and the communication goal they want to achieve.
Oof. I have so many leaders I'm thinking back that could be benefit from a CRA relationship. So what a good thing that you are bringing to organizations. On the psychology side, I want to get into that a little bit, because you brought it up, and I think it is so key to think about, right, all of the things that make us human, all of the things that make our personalities, whether it's our, in our personal lives and our professional lives. What's kind of the psychological impact behind communication? And I know you all have studied this so much. Talk just a little bit about the influence between that psychology backing and the practice of communication, and how they play together.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, even though psychology is really fascinating, and we always want to understand who we are and who the other person is and adapt to that. And that's helpful to some extent, especially for leaders who are focusing on things like self-awareness and emotional intelligence and so forth. At the end of the day, though, our whole practice and our whole firm is built around the fact that behaviors are what makes you better, right? What are the behaviors? What are the routines that create excellence that is really attainable, right? To anyone who's willing to work on them and build habits and build excellence, much like elite athletes have become. They're just the best people that master the fundamentals and are interested in getting better at the margins, right? And so we really focus on, from a leadership coaching perspective, what those behaviors and those routines are. And from a communication perspective, we also know through different theories, elaboration likelihood model and parasocial relationship theory. And a lot of what the academic literature says is actually how human brains function and create meaning, not just exchange information. And that's a really important distinction when I think about, like, who are some of the best communicators in terms of leaders I coach. And they are the people that excel at creating meaning, not just transmitting information. They understand that communication, isn't about just town halls and emails, but really how they show up every day. And that there is science to say if they show up in a way that is credible, so they're highly competent, which becomes assumed at a certain level of leadership, right? That they are likable in one way, shape, or form, generally likable, and they are consistent, that they have a frequently and predictable drumbeat of presence, that people can create what we call parasocial relationships, which is everyone feels like they have a relationship with the CEO, even though they might see him in a town hall once a year, right? It's very similar to like the relationship everyone feels like they have with Taylor Swift. It's like they would be so excited to see her, but like they don't know she doesn't know who you are, walking down the street. But because she shows up, or others, fanship aside, as highly competent in her craft, highly likable in general, and also with a frequency of when her tours are, when she's going to be on podcasts, etc. There creates that relationship, and that's really key to leaders having a presence that expands beyond those micro moments of communication.
That's fascinating, because I think one of the other things, and I would be curious, I would say that most leaders are well-intentioned. They want to have that consistency. They want to show up the same way. But this is where maybe some of that psychological impact comes to play is, if you're caught off guard, or if you're, whether it's unexpected moments or whether it's just a challenge, how do you train people to come back to that credibility, that kind of consistent, credible place if they're distracted? And certainly, this spans from, I'm thinking of startups all the way up until, major Fortune companies. But tell me a little bit about how do you get them to, maybe it goes back to what we said in the beginning. It's that like taking a minute and processing the information before acting, before speaking. Because one of the things that will be curious to hear you say is you could build all of that and then lose it pretty quickly, right? If you're not keeping the hygiene of conversation, of all of that. But what do you tell people? How do they come back to that and always show up?
Yeah, I mean, two things come to mind. One is first the mindset of curiosity. Like someone needs to be naturally curious and want to ask questions versus feeling like they always need to have the answers, and to have a general desire to get better and get curious about how communications can help them achieve their goals, right? And so having that natural curiosity helps. But other than that, white space is really important. So what we've seen the best leaders do as a routine, as a practice, as a habit that is never ending, is creating the appropriate amount of white space in their day and their week and really protecting it, right? As if it were a critical meeting, to give themselves the space to kind of reset, to process, to really be intentional about how they show up in what lies ahead. And so that is a really, critical routine that the best leaders have, and incorporating, there's probably a lot of things they do with the white space, but including reflection of how am I showing up? Are people responding to me the way I want them to? What is my next critical goal? And what are those three, task, identity, and relationship goals that I need to think about and bring to that next conversation?
Do you often think about, when you're working with a leader like that, do you think about the people who are around them and supporting them? And certainly we know what the comms function is, but when you think about, maybe it's a chief of staff, maybe it's just a close confidant, when you're advising a leader, or you're stretching them into a new way of leading a little bit, what do you tell them to surround themselves with? And I wonder, I'm just curious, because I think I've worked with many CEOs who everyone kind of glosses over the conversations with them. They go on stage and you say that you've done such a great job. It was so great. You hit all the marks, all the thing, when that's not true. So I'm curious, what do you tell them to kind of get that? I would call it their personal board around them, or whatever it is. Is that part of sort of your path to advising them?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, especially the higher you get, there's really 5 to 7 critical relationships that are going to make you successful. And there needs to be really strong relationships and a high level of trust within those relationships. We're in the process, we're in kind of the last stages of the process of redesigning a whole executive onboarding program for a client. And, whereas they kind of initially we're taking a little bit more of an HR approach and what do we need to get access to, and kind of more the operational approach. We're like, at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we are crystal clear on the 5 to 7 key relationships and get those people connected with good quality conversations and context as early as possible, rather than just going through the org chart and, peppering a new leader with 50 different conversations a day. And that's too much and too many. So it's really about quality over quantity. It's about asking great questions. The better, if the leader is asking the right questions, great questions, non-obvious questions, they're going to be able to extract much more from the time they do have with those people. But yeah, you want to surround yourself certainly, with a supporting cast that are going to tell you what you need to hear, not always what you want to hear. Yeah. And it's an ever evolving journey, right? No one's going to be perfect all the time in terms of taking feedback or giving feedback, but that's part of the coaching process. And so, that's why we're privileged to do the work that we do, so that when they do need that kind of unbiased point of view, they have that as a checkpoint. But certainly the quality of the teams that they lead and the people around them, having trust and credibility with those folks is critical to their success.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as so many of the listeners of Cohesion are varied in their level, they may be, just coming up in internal comms, HR in that space, and some have been in it for a long time. What are some of those kind of go-to regular tips that you would say at each level, right? So for example, I was at GoDaddy for a long time and I had a nice team, but we supported every level of the organization, from the CEO to your sort of more senior director level. So all of the levels there. And I wonder, where should someone start whether they're supporting just sort of the leader of a small division all the way up to the CEO? What are some of those kind of go-to tips that you would just kind of put on your Post-it note for those comms people to keep reminding themselves when they're working with leaders to be more authentic? What are some of those that you've got? I'm sure you have 100 of them, but
yeah, I was sifting through. And a Post-it note. I have a Post-it note for real estate.
Yeah, exactly. Well, because, and let me tell you why I say Post-it note is because, if you don't make the white space to read, to prep, right, which it sounds is key, whether you're a leader or at whatever place, you're needing in the moment that quick reflection. So if you could only put 3 tips on a Post-it note to constantly remind us as we're going, us communicators, what would they be?
Well, I think the first, when you're talking about the split moments, like symbols can be used on a dime. So when we talk a lot about symbolic leadership. And so what is a physical manifestation of a value that a leader's trying to communicate and be known for, right? So it could be they really want to be seen as someone who listens to the frontline workers and really takes the voice of an employee into consideration. It's like, great, well, we're going to have our next town hall like on the front lines then. And like just that location alone sends a strong message. If we want to, be seen as someone getting ready for a promotion, it's like, we're going to dress a certain way or deliver a certain message. So I think keeping like a radar out for what does my leader want to be known for and seen as values, and really kind of giving micro moment and micro doses, not that it feels too much, right? It can be weird, but what are those micro symbols that can be used that really kind of demonstrate that beyond words, I think would be one. And that's when I draw upon a lot. I think you having that kind of, we alluded to it earlier, we call it the 4-8-40 plan, that's based on that kind of executive visibility and parasocial relationship structure, where if there's a regular cadence of communication, that sounds like a drumbeat, right? So once a quarter, it's 4 big moments. 8 times a quarter, it's kind of a medium event. And then 40, like whether it be every week, there's some sort of post or like light moment of visibility, and being able to draw upon that and make sure that there's frequency. Because what we know from the literature is that frequency matters more than duration. So we always say that 15 times 4 is more than 1 times 60. If they have 60 minutes in a given month on a leader's calendar, do 4 15-minute conversations instead of 160, because that frequency is actually more important.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I'm imagining my Post-it, and I think the symbolism piece is really incredible. Even that visual to be able to, I'm imagining just reminding a CEO by kind of reminding them of that, saying like, this is what you got to keep coming back to. And that repeating of things can be so challenging. Hearing you say that 15-4, you're exactly right. I think there's this moment in all of, whenever we're working with an organization where you want to do new things, where you want to, you want it to feel different or something. But the reality is people want you to show up. The reliability of how a leader shows up, as you've just said, it becomes really critical to how they're perceived for the long term versus the short term. So I like that. I'm thinking of my Post-it note that I'm going to write and remind my own CEO all the time.
Yeah. Symbolism, visibility drumbeat, and frequency.
Yeah. I really like that. In a world, I want to switch our gears because I know AI is a topic that's really important to you. It's really important to CRA, and I can't wait to hear. And you've got a lot going on in that space that I want to hear about. But I want to kind of take a step back on the role of AI generally and talk about, let's say, a year and a half ago, when some of the AI drumbeat and controversy and all of that started to come to the forefront. What was the first step that you personally took to get a hold of it so that you could understand its impact, AI's impact on not just the people that you're supporting, but on your work? Where did you land a year and a half ago on it? And where do you land today when you're thinking about kind of the impact of AI on leadership and communication overall?
Yeah, I mean, where did I start? Gosh, I was a clumsy toddler at Disney World. Like I was just getting in there and fumbling my way around, and there's no replacement for just getting your hands dirty. So I was getting licenses to what were then, the leading LLMs and just playing around with it in both personal and professional use cases. I learned 45 different things I can use, ways that I could make use of leftover ham at Easter. So it is fun, but to do that, it gives you a lot of firsthand insight as to what these really are good for and what they're not. So many people that I've spoken with that have started using AI have had a bad experience in their first couple of use cases because they were trying to use the tools for stuff that they really just weren't designed for. And so they've kind of like put up an X and like, oh, I hate AI, it doesn't work. So it's really about, it was a very humbling experience, I will say, to have to, learn a whole new language almost, but it really just had to come from diving in and using it and trying to learn. And thankfully, I'm surrounded by a lot of really brilliant colleagues, several of which are much smarter than I in that domain that I was able to learn from along the way.
And what are you, as you're navigating with clients, how they're thinking about AI, how they're using AI, what are some of the ways that you're helping them to navigate that? Just generally. And I would also love for you to talk a little bit about Alex. I know that's, kind of CRA's AI supporter. I don't know how you would describe it, but tell us a little bit about Alex. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll first step back and answer your first question around like how are we helping our clients, and we're helping our clients while we're doing all this work ourselves. So we're really taking it seriously and doing our own work within the firm that, then whether it's tomorrow or a year and a half from now, we can then extend those learnings to clients. But we're really helping leaders think about AI as a co-pilot rather than an autopilot. A lot of leaders get these kind of headlines around their capability, like, oh, well, great. Like we don't need X team anymore. And the reality is like, we don't believe it's going to be a tool that replaces jobs. It's really replacing tasks strategically. And so, we're helping leaders develop AI literacy, technical skills, really understanding how they're designed, what they're supposed to do. So many of our clients that we talk to are using them as search engines. Like they're not search engines. That's not fundamentally how they function. So really helping them understand both the technicalities and what they're good for and what are good use cases and where the technology just hasn't caught up yet to a human capability. And then also thinking about the human factors and how we selectively and intentionally decide what we have AI do for us and what we need to maintain human part in for skill development. What we don't want to do is 10 years from now, we have a generation where all of this, a lot of the skills that would be able to understand whether an AI tool delivered a quality product or not are lost. Like we need to preserve some of that judgment and some of those foundational skills. So that's kind of at a high level what we're helping leaders think through. The way that this is manifesting across our three practices is exciting and slightly different for each of them. So within our strategic communications practice, like I said, we're doing all the work ourselves. We've created projects in Claude that now, streamline a lot of the work that we do, but we're able to consult with our clients to take them through an integration journey that we've found to be useful and that they can. So starts with understanding the tools, starts with identifying like where's the intersection of tasks and use cases that, say, a communication team does, and helping them make thoughtful choices about where AI should be used, and again, where it shouldn't for a variety of reasons, whether that be quality or skill erosion, et cetera. And then helping them roll that out, implement it, right, refine it, and as a cycle. On the leadership front, as you've alluded to, we've developed Alex, which is our AI leadership coach, and really gives leaders, 24/7 access to our research and expertise. So Alex is built solely on Admired Leadership proprietary content. It doesn't crawl the web for whatever, leadership content is out there from a psychological perspective. It really maintains kind of the behavioral view I spoke about. But what's fascinating is that we're not using it to replace human coaches. Our coaching practice is very vibrant and growing, but really to extend it and enhance it. So oftentimes when I'm coaching a leader, we'll talk about it, we'll have a conversation, we'll kind of pick one or two things to work on. And the way that I can give Alex is like, great, use Alex every time you're going into the situation to prep, or, have it be devil's advocate next time you're in this situation to give you real-time advice based on the feedback, or, I am up late, but I'm not up at 3 a.m. So if you are, use Alex, right, as a replacement. So it's incredible just how conversational it can be. And, users have the ability to add preferences, which really tailor the advice to their specific role or the people they're leading, or, any number of specific contexts. And then lastly, on the talent side, we're looking at how AI can help streamline really empirically based assessments. So for example, we have a new leadership character assessment that's in the beta phase and about to roll out more broadly. And so how can we kind of use AI to help with some of the analysis? Not, of course, we still have human oversight to it, but also make connections that, maybe a human could have missed. And really, we think that both human and AI together can create a stronger result for the leader.
Yeah, absolutely. I also wonder if, the thing that I like when I've learned a little bit about Alex from you is just, it also comes to the table with immediate credibility in that you're a trusted partner of these CEOs and these leaders, and they know that work, they know where the information is coming from. They trust you all. It's coming in from there. It's not going broad, and sourcing all kinds of things. It's coming very clearly into a pool of work that they know is trustworthy and credible. So that's very cool. And yes, I love the idea that, if you want to train yourself at 3 a.m, that you, Lisa, don't have to get on the phone with someone. You've done all this work that's feeding into this alternative option. I get really excited about AI. I also, like you, describing it as a toddler, I went kind of crazy trying to figure it out. And one of the biggest things, which you've alluded to with what you were talking about, is using it for that alternative thinking. And we're all biased, in every way possible. So when you can ask AI to pull out the opposite for you, pull out where your gaps are, that's where I've found it being very, very effective. Creating projects in Claude as well, or personas that you can come back to and say, hey, I prepped this entire conversation for one group of people. I want to know in detail how the frontline folks are gonna poke holes in this theory or poke holes in all of this. It does give you a chance to correct some of before you even get out there and test things, which is really fun.
Yeah, in a very psychologically safe space.
Exactly. No judgment in there, which is really nice. I want to come kind of full back around to a little bit of your background. You clearly are a creative at heart. It sounds like you have a passion for both kind of crafting for the art side of things. How do you apply, and CRA apply, all of this behavioral data, all of this empirical work that you were doing, and you've got all of this, and matching it with the sort of creativity, the art side of life? How are you bringing those together, and kind of what's the approach that CRA and you take on that?
Yeah, I mean, literally, it's always a dance, and the constructs of any given day for me and the conversations I'm a part of. I think the easiest and kind of cleanest way to describe it is, because we have the foundation of behavioral science and we know kind of how information flows through organizations, how messages are received and interpreted in the best ways, what drives people to act on what they hear versus resist. That kind of gives us a solid foundation of like, here's the situation and how we need to approach it. But then from there, it becomes a lot of creativity and instinct, right? And, people use the term intuition a lot as it relates to, creativity and I really think intuition is more a byproduct of experience. Like that intuition in some cases, especially in the professional context, right, is coming from experiences where you've had to exercise judgment, where you've made a call or seen something play out either successfully or not. And so once we kind of get our guardrails on us, then it's like, how do we actually get to that goal becomes a lot more kind of creativity and intuition based on the reality of the situation. We have within our firm, once a month, we have what we call coaching clinics, where we bring two, scenarios to the table that we all like provide here's how we would handle that situation in advance. And then we discuss it like, oh, well, why do you approach it that way? And I approach it this way. And we were just kind of talking, and our founder was saying the other day of, wow, this is a really meaty challenge. And like 5 different perspectives are all valid. Like none of them are wrong. But it's the fact that we're taking a certain approach just comes down to the artful piece of, knowing the people involved and knowing the sensitivities and knowing kind of the long game versus the short game. And so I love that because, on the communication side, yes, creativity is sometimes design and art. And then more sometimes on the relationship and leadership side, it's more kind of how you approach a situation and, factor in all the pieces to get to the best outcome.
Yeah. Ooh. Lisa, everything you're saying, it makes me want to tell everybody to hire CRA because I feel like these are the things that, even training communicators, I imagine that's part of your world. I can imagine a world where you're training other ones of you, and I think because I think in that moment, you really want to be able to pull from some of this. And I'm imagining that if those listening can gain some information about CRA, but tell a little bit about how we can, those who don't know what CRA is, how can they get involved? How can they reach out to you? What's the best way to kind of learn from you all ongoing?
Yeah, there's so many opportunities. So I'll start with very high level. So CRA-admiredleadership.com is our website, gives you an overview of kind of everything we do in those 3 areas of strategic communication, leadership, and talent. And we have offerings in all those areas that range from free to paid, right? So on the free side, which I'm happy we can put links in the show notes, we have a daily, we call Admired Leadership Field Note. So bite-size blurb delivered to your inbox every morning around kind of quick snips of you can put into practice that day and become a better leader and move yourself forward. So that's a great way to get involved. We have anyone's welcome to try Alex for a week of free trial access. So that's a free offering for anybody as well. And then on the communication side, we have a number of, obviously we do anything from large scale consulting engagements to coaching teams through either long-term or short-term situations. And we offer a ton of development opportunities. So we run a lot of communication events all around the country in different forums. Communication for leaders, communication for communicators. Like if anyone's looking for a development opportunity, would love to connect with me, and I'm happy to figure out what your goals are and kind of point you in the right direction. We also have a free, every week we put together an AI, we call it Confluence, the intersection of AI and communications. So that's a weekly newsletter, comes out usually Sunday nights. So it's right in your inbox Monday morning. And it's a great way to stay on top of what's happening in the AI space. And if you were going to read one thing a week, I would say we do all the heavy lifting of figuring out what's out there and, what's the latest and greatest. And so that's a great resource to dive into as well. But yeah, check out our website. I'm on LinkedIn. Anyone's welcome to connect with me. And once I understand what people are looking for and kind of how they want to get involved, we're all about community. We don't do advertising, mass marketing, as you can tell. Most people haven't heard of us, though we work with, at least 35 of the Fortune 100. We do a lot of work, but we like being kind of behind the scenes and making our clients look great. So it's all through referrals and word of mouth.
Awesome. Well, and I think from places like this, getting to hear just your brilliance on podcasts like this. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for really, we got to talk about a lot. And I think I'm excited to do my Post-it note, to be honest, and to kind of keep coming back to that. And and to sign up for these newsletters. I'm thrilled for that too. I appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much for being a partner of Simpplr's as well. We're really happy you all are part of our world. It was really good to speak with you today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Carolyn, and I look forward to continuing to partner with you and your team.